Welcome to At Issue. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. The policy positions of political candidates are often blurred in the political process, and with the internet, private lives are now for all to see. The question we now face is that good or bad for the political process, and is it worse than it has been in the past? We're going to discuss that with three people who would know best. Let me introduce them. They are Dave Kaler. Dave is a state senator who represents Peoria. He's a Democrat serving down in Springfield. Dave, thank you as always for being here. Also with us, Ray LaHood. I don't know how many times you've been on the show, Ray. Ray, of course, former congressman from Peoria and the former transportation secretary. Thank you so much for being here. Good to be here. And Frank McEmin is here. Frank is an expert on all things political in Illinois. He is with the Dirksen Congressional Center. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, H.
And as always looking good in a bow tie.
Thank you.
Having set the stage with, we blur positions, we go after personal issues. Sometimes it gets pretty seamy. I'd like to hear from all three of you. What's your take, and I will start with Frank, on just the overall tenor of the political process in today's races?
If I had to pick one word, I think I would pick coarseness. I think the political discourse, the political talk is coarse. And by that I mean it's filled with personal invective, it's unrestrained, I don't see a sense of limits. We boil ideas down to shorthand, bumper sticker phrases, and they've taken on an edge which isn't unprecedented in American politics, but certainly characterizes today's political discourse.
Ray, you've had many political races. What's your sense, having gone through so many races, compared to today? It wasn't as vitriolic when you ran, was it?
Well, I worked for two congressmen.
Tom
Railsback from the Quad Cities and Bob Michels from Central Illinois. And in all the campaigns that I was involved with them, which were tough campaigns, the kind of language, the kind of ads that are being run, the type of campaigns that are being run were unheard of. During my own time, 14 years in Congress, most of which I had opponents, we never got involved in this kind of dirty campaigning, negative campaigning. I think that I think the true test of how bad this is that when you saw Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio of Florida, who's one of the presidential candidates, tell people at a town meeting, I had to apologize to my kids for what I said about another person. To me, that says it all. And I don't ever remember any presidential candidate ever saying that he had to apologize to his family, that he was sorry for what he said, that it was not the right tone to be setting. Now, has it happened in the history of presidential campaigns? I think Frank will answer that, and the answer is yes. Has it happened in our lifetime? During my 35 years of watching presidential races, absolutely not.
Senator Kaler, your assessment of the political environment today?
I think we're at a time when reality TV meets politics. And what's kind of overwhelming is just that the whole tone of politics now is so negative. And I guess for my grandkids, I don't want them watching some of that stuff because it's vicious, it's vile, it's crude, it's demoralizing, it's demeaning, and I expect that some of that's going to take place in a political context, but just all the time, every day, 24 hours a day. I mean, I don't watch a lot of it, and I have to unplug at some point. I watch home and garden television.
These people are running for the highest elective office in the country. Commander-in-Chief, the head of our government. The kind of negative campaigning, the kind of language, the kind of name-calling does not befit the office they're running for.
So before we go to history, and I know we want to talk a little bit about history, but Is the situation such that candidates are afraid to run now?
Well, I don't know that they're afraid of anything. I think they seized on a couple of strategies that have worked. Political scientists have documented over and over again that going negative works. And I think in a presidential contest, a lot of folks believe that the ultimate decision about the person you're voting for is based on character. It's your assessment of their character, not your assessment of whether or not they're a protectionist or a free trader. People don't understand that. They understand character. Well, if that's the basis for voting, then the strategy is assassinate character. It's a rational response to what works. And it has an unfortunate, devastating impact on our public life.
How much impact with regard to this particular issue has the outside money with the super PACs, et cetera? Is that, I mean, because we see many of those spots that are negative are not from the campaign of the opposing candidate.
Oh, I think that Donald Trump changed the rules here on what can be said and cannot be said, and his whole campaign has nothing to do with super PACs. He spent the lion's share of the money that he's spent has been his own money, even though he has raised some money. But he has no super PAC. There are no outside groups funding. But he's just taken the position that he can say whatever he wants, truthful or untruthful. Most of it's untruthful. Say whatever he wants about somebody. Most of it's untrue. Call anybody that he wants a name, and it really has, the idea of the outside PACs and the super PACs has not really come into play. And to your question, to Frank, has this inhibited people from running? At the start of this campaign, there were 17 Republican candidates. It didn't inhibit any of them from thinking that they could be the next president until they got in the ring with Donald Trump. And then they might have had a few second thoughts about it, because he has no rules. He has no regulations. He has no values when it comes to how do I conduct myself running for the highest office of president.
Then is the public to blame here? Or?
Well, I just want to respond to that a little bit. I think at the presidential level, yeah, that people are used. They have their thick skins already. They're used to, that's the arena they're going to go into. I think where it does inhibit people, though, from getting into politics is maybe at the local level. Maybe not so much if you're running for town board or school board or something like that. But if you get into state politics, as an example, you better get a thick skin real quick, because depending on whether you're a targeted race or not, there could be tremendous amounts of money. Just in the primary here in Illinois, 2 legislative races, they're spending over $5-6 million a piece on those primaries. That's unheard of.
Frank, you were shaking your head yes when Dave said that it does inhibit some people on the local level from running for a political office.
Well, yes, I think it does. I think even more of a disincentive is that at all levels of government, and I'm just speaking from a personal perspective, of course, we haven't seen government work very well. I mean, that to me is more of a disincentive to enter politics, when you don't believe you can have an effect or that government works very well. I think it's interesting to try to put yourself in the place of somebody who's 25 or 35 years old. They've come to political consciousness in the last 15 years and figure out what government's tried to do for them. Why would you be surprised that you have disaffected students rallying around unconventional candidates? They haven't seen government do anything for them. They're loaded with student debt. They don't know whether they're going to get a job. It doesn't surprise me that there's a disaffection with politics.
I think Frank has hit on something here from this point of view. I think a lot of the people that are supporting Trump have not really been involved in the process, and they're involved now because they have experienced the fact that the government is not working. Congress has not addressed the immigration issue. There are 12 million illegals living here. our infrastructure is falling apart. Everyone knows that. Congress is not dealing with that. If you're a veteran and you come back and you get ill-treated at a veterans hospital, your family finds out about it. People think the Veterans Administration is not treating our veterans very well. Again, the government is just simply not working well. Every aspect of people's lives, they feel that the government has let them down, and then they see a fella come along, Make America Great, which is a code word for fixing immigration, fixing a tax code, fixing infrastructure, fixing a lousy veteran system, and that is a code phrase for I'm going to fix the government.
But does the public really believe that, and we'll just focus on Donald Trump right now, assuming he might be elected president, do they really believe that he is going to ship 12 million illegal aliens out of the country, that he's going to put up a wall and have Mexico pay for it, that he is going to eliminate all Muslims, at least for the time being, from entering the country and on down the list?
No, but they think that he's going to do something about it. They think that he's going to address it. Congress hasn't addressed it. Congress held a lot of hearings when it came to veterans. He uses this line, we're going to take care of our veterans. Everybody knows what that means. They've seen the long lines. They've heard the horror stories of veterans that have not been treated well at veterans hospitals, that fought in Iraq or Afghanistan. They know the illegals are here. Do they think he's going to build a wall, export 12 million? Probably not. But they think he's going to do something about it. Again, the code words, Make America Great Again.
Well, what he's also done is he's tapped into people's fears. I mean, there's a real distasteful part of America that's coming out with all the presidential stuff going on. I mean, racism, the phobias we have against people of different color, people of different religions, people of different lifestyles. I mean, I think he's appealing to that fear, and people are eating it up. But I don't know. This is a strange period of time. In reality, if you want to see how Springfield works as an example, I mean, Springfield is completely dysfunctional right now. But in the past, I think there have been some good relationships between Republicans and Democrats working across the aisle. In fact, I tell people often when they come to visit me in Springfield that most of our legislation is bipartisan, probably 95% of it. This year, it's just off the charts. I mean, it's not fun this year. Springfield has a very kind of gloomy, cloudy feel to it just because I think we have a governor that doesn't know how to negotiate, and it's unprecedented territory. So that's really the depressing part, because for the most part, the relationships that I have with people across the aisle are good.
But you would think from the media, and maybe the media is part of the blame here, but you would think that, well, you're a Democrat, Republicans don't think much of you, and vice versa. So are we is the media playing a role here?
Well, I think one of the major differences between today and 35 years ago and any time before that is the balkanization of the media. The fact that if you have an opinion, you know where to go to have your opinion reinforced. And when you're having your opinion reinforced, you'll hear no counter argument. And there's a comfort in that. You're constantly reinforced in what you believe. And I think that's unfortunate, but it's a function of the media climate. And I also lament the passing of solid print reporting, where news organizations could hire reporters who could go out and fact check, and whose papers were widely read and nationally distributed. I think that we paid a high price for the passing of that print journalism.
You know, the other part of this is social media. Frank and I were talking about this. How many tweets does Donald Trump do a day? Every time somebody says something about him, he tweets back some disparaging thing about whoever the person was that said something. I mean, you got candidates running for president tweeting. And what does that reach? Well, it's thousands, maybe millions of people. And the whole social media thing, I think, is a part of it. And then the 24/7 cable news channels. Everybody at this table A lot of people watching know there's just not enough news for 24/7, and having 3 stations doing it,
Yeah.
come on. What happens is you keep repeating the negative things over and over again, keep repeating the negative stuff that happened, and you know, people start believing it.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the fear that the former congressman brought up. It reminds me of the Trail of Tears with Andrew Jackson. There was a lot of concern back then about Native Americans. They didn't call them Native Americans back then, and Andrew Jackson decided it was time to ship them west of the Mississippi. And he won accolades for that. So this fear of, you know, the Islamophobia or building a wall to keep and mostly Mexicans out is not new.
No, I mean the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s, I believe. At the beginning of the 20th century, a huge anti-immigration factor entered into politics. So as Dave mentioned, there is this underlying current throughout American history. It's a fear of the unknown. It's a fear of it's not like me. So what you're seeing is a person, and I'll use the example of Donald Trump, who excels at promoting himself as a brand, who understands the use of media, who has in his own makeup just absolute confidence that whatever he says, he can get people to believe. So you put all of that together, and it's a toxic mixture.
Fact-checking is easier today for people, but do they bother to fact-check? Because we hear the same things out of Ted Cruz, out of John Kasich. John Kasich always says, well, I created 400,000 private sector jobs in Ohio. And you fact-check that, and in fact, it's just about right. It is about 400,000, except that in the private sector, Ohio only gained 9.3% in the private sector, while the nation gained 11.7% during that same period of time. So you have to be careful on how you play the numbers. So have we become too gullible as viewers and as listeners? Are we not spending enough time checking, or is it too difficult?
I think people do believe what they see on television, and they believe the people that they see on television. I think part of Trump's the Trump phenomenon is that he is a celebrity, and a lot of people watched his celebrity show, and a lot of people got a kick out of the fact that he could fire people than he had, and people see him as a powerful person. One of the reasons that Ronald Reagan was very successful early on is because he was on television all the time, either promoting General Electric or talking about his own philosophy. And he knew how to connect with the camera. Trump knows how to connect. If you know how to connect with that camera, boom, people start to believe you.
But the difference between Reagan and Trump is that Reagan at least had been governor of a state.
And part of the fact-checking thing is this, H. The Washington Post has a guy named Glenn Kessler who does it all the time. Almost every other newspaper in the country is cutting back on reporters.
Yeah.
The reporting is not going on. The comprehensive looking into issues and people's backgrounds does not exist because every paper in the country has cut back because they're, the lack of advertisement and so forth.
Well, even on this, go ahead, Dave.
I was just to say, what we don't have is objectivity in reporting too much. Frank was talking about it, and Ray was talking about the cable news networks. They're not there to be objective. They're there to be entertaining, and that's what we get. Is we get entertainment. I don't usually watch Donald Trump. But the other night, I was over at a friend's house, and I watched for about a half an hour. And that half an hour is when he was at one of his rallies where they had, it was after Chicago where the protesters were. In a half an hour, all I heard him say was, get them out, arrest them, and talk about how this one guy who stormed the stage was probably an ISIS terrorist. There was no policy discussion. There was nothing of any kind of substance that related to why you'd be running for president. And the crowd was eating it up, and I'm sure his TV ratings were sky high. In fact, if you look at how much time candidates are given, you'll see that he commands most of the time because, it's entertainment. It's
Look at
news.
these protesters have been at been at campaign events since the history of the country. And if you look back at other campaigns and other candidates, what do? They ignore them.
Right.
They don't start yelling at them, and they don't tell their
Punch 'em in the
Secret Service
face.
or police, we're gonna punch you out. They continue on. It's because it's a part of the process. This is a fellow that's never been involved in the process. He doesn't like somebody telling him what their point of view is, even as a protester. So if you look back at the long history of campaigns in the U.S., there have always been protesters. They've been escorted out very quietly by the police or law enforcement. Nobody pays any attention. He's drawn attention to it now just because he doesn't like somebody in his face.
And it gets him ratings.
Yeah.
And look at what happens when a debate moderator tries to challenge the misuse of facts, or the use of non-facts, I guess. And that's happened a couple of times where the moderators have gone back to a Trump or a Cruz or any of the other candidates and say, but that's not true. You said this on this date. How do you explain the difference? And the response is to talk over the question.
Or to attack them.
Yeah. It's not a reasoned response. It's not a thoughtful response. Ray talks about tweets and social media. If you're tweeting in response to an action, how much reflection do you think takes place before that tweet
What do you get,
goes
160 characters?
out? Yeah, and there's no thought behind it.
And if you, just on Frank's point, if you look at what Chris Wallace did, so he says to Trump, your waste, fraud, and abuse is going to balance the budget. So Chris Wallace puts up a chart. Here's what you save in Medicare and Social Security or whatever, and it doesn't add up to anything. And as Frank said, boom, he just moves on.
The number he used was I can save $300 billion in pharmaceutical costs by negotiating.
Right.
And Medicare
And he
Part D
puts
is
up the chart.
$77 billion.
Yes.
So
And he's got the chart right there that shoots him down.
not even close.
But I think there's even a more general question or issue, which is, if you solved all those problems, if you checked all the facts, if you challenged candidates successfully, would it really make a difference in terms of voters? Because I think voters at the presidential level anyway lose track of that. These debates are these issues are awfully complex. And to try to suggest to a voter you need to know the ins and outs of trade policy and make an informed decision on a constellation of even 5 issues, I don't see that holds much promise.
Well, and just figure this, that if you're trying to campaign for any level, president on down, and you promote something that is positive, that's going to affect people's lives, you're really at risk, because then you might be attacked on that, and people will look into it. But if you're talking about appealing to people's fears, then you're pretty safe. And if you're talking about being against something, you're pretty safe. And that's kind of what politics has evolved into. Instead of talking about what we're going to do in a positive way, we're talking about what really scares us.
So we can fall back on the phrase, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And Mr. Trump or Mr. Rauner, for that, on state level, I'm going to shake things up in Springfield. I'm going to make America great again. Well, I'm mad as hell at Congress, so yeah, I'm for you. I'm for you, Governor.
Yeah, but you have to, I think there's, and I just read Ray's book, and it was an excellent book. Frank helped to write that, and a couple of things that I said I think is worth pointing out, that if you're really going to be good at being a public servant, you have to listen. And in listening, you have to empathetically listen. In other words, you have to say, why is that important to you? Let me stand in your shoes for a moment and find out about that. We don't have that going on in politics enough.
Well, even when you were in Congress, you tried to have listening sessions, and I call them that, in Pennsylvania,
Right.
and that didn't even work out very well.
Yeah, it worked okay for a while, but then people come and go and leave, and other new people come in and with a different idea. But when you know somebody, when you really know a person and you know their family, it's hard to be critical of them. And you may have your disagreements, but they're over issues, and they're settled by, hey, how do we work this out, and how do we solve this problem? That's been the history of our country, and you know, even while I was serving, Newt Gingrich was Speaker, Clinton was in the White House. We passed 3 balanced budgets. We passed 2 infrastructure transportation bills. We passed welfare reform, which Clinton vetoed twice, and then finally signed it. And the point is, with a strongly held Speaker, with strongly held views, and a strongly held views of a Democrat in the White House, we got things done. Why? First of all, they believed in government. Second of all, they believed in compromise. And third of all, they believed in working together.
Well, we're going to see what happens in the political process as it moves forward. For now, we're out of time here. We'll continue this conversation. And you continue at home as well. Thank you to Frank McEmin of the Dirksen Congressional Center and to Dave Kaler, State Senator representing Peoria. And thank you, of course, to Ray LaHood, former Congressman and former Transportation Secretary. Thank you for the stimulating conversation. And as always, we enjoy you joining us on At Issue. We'll be back next time with another edition of At Issue.